Well, welcome everyone to our local government education webinar. This is Local Efficiency Assessment Program, LEAP. My name is Ann Silvis. I work for University of Illinois Extension, and we host these regular webinars for local government officials and local government leaders. Today we have two presenters, both from the Center for Governmental Studies at Northern Illinois University. You have bioinformation in the background material that you were sent, so I'll be very brief in my introduction. I just want to welcome Norm Walzer and Andy Blank. Norm is a senior research scholar at the Center for Government Studies, and Andy Blank is a research associate at the Center for Government Studies at Northern Illinois University. They have a lot of information to share with us. I think it's going to be very useful. We have muted your microphones because that helps us manage the sound quality. But if you have questions during or after the presentation, just use the chat box and we'll monitor that. Andy and Norm will monitor that too, and we'll either get to your questions as they come up or we'll deal with those at the end of the hour. So thanks, Norm and Andy, for presenting to us. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ann, and thanks, Nancy, for arranging it. It's kind of an exciting topic, and we're getting a lot of interest across the state on it. And so this is really a great opportunity to talk to some people and see how we can improve it. We'll stress as we go through this that this is kind of an evolving process, and so we want to continue to upgrade it. So we'd like to have feedback. We'd like to have goods and bads about how it works or doesn't work, and we'll try to make those modifications as long as resources permit. And so we've had the process that we're doing today, the one that we're showing today, really has gone through a couple of iterations at this point. People have suggested ways that we can make it better. So the background on this is that as you look ahead, the rural counties in Illinois particularly are going to face some significant population changes. And this is part of a major demographic trend across the country. And we see by projections provided by the Illinois Department of Public Health, it looks like about 53 or so of the Illinois rural counties, the 66 rural counties, are probably going to lose population within the next decade or so. And there's going to be a significant increase in the proportion of elderly in these counties that are going to require different services. There's going to be a stagnant or maybe decreasing school age population in some counties. So that's going to cause some changes there. But what this is going to end up with at the end of 5, 6, 7 years is that we're probably going to have a complex government structure that was suitable maybe 100 years ago when it was started, but it's less suitable now. And if you move this or think ahead, what you're probably going to have is significant increase in property taxes per person, so that if you have a decline in population and you have the same or increasing property taxes if you allow for inflation, then you're going to have each person paying a substantially higher property tax bill. And given the SALT requirements in the federal legislation and deductibility, the states with relatively high property taxes are going to be at a disadvantage compared to other states because it's simply going to cost more to their taxpayers. So we developed this local efficiency assessment plan. It came out of the governor's task force on government consolidation and unfunded mandates. They basically identified a number of different types of remedies that could be put in place, and they passed, as I recall, they recommended about 27 pieces of legislation. I think there's 14 to 15 of them that actually passed. There's some that are coming in for the session this year. It was all permissive legislation. It was all the idea that what can we do to give options for local leaders to basically adjust their governmental structure or make changes they didn't used to have in the past. So this is pretty much the background on the LEAP program as we're doing it. If you look at the population projections, this is what you're likely to see in, we think, by 2025. And you can see some significant declines in the southeastern part, the eastern part, the northwestern part, and actually some of the western part of the state. So these are the counties that are likely to have some significant impacts. And best we can tell, based on the literature, is these population changes are probably going to continue well into the early 2020s, or 2030s, I'm sorry. So this is something that's not going to go away in the next day or so. So the question I think that comes up is if you have these kinds of changes, and if in fact you have to adjust due to property taxes or whatever reason, you really have some choices to make at the local level. You can talk about, are you going to try to do the highest quality of services that can be afforded? Do we have different types of services, different locations? Do we try to have the least cost in delivering the services that we want, particularly with attention to property taxes? Do we really just go after the fewest numbers of governments? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on, how this would affect the cost. And then do we want to minimize property taxes, and do we want to basically maintain a high quality of services? All the way through the task force deliberations and the stuff that we've been doing, there's never been an attempt to reduce quality of services. It's really what services do the people want at the local level, and then how to deliver them at the least cost or maybe the least property taxes. So if you look at what's happened in the past, the costs of public services in Illinois, if you look from 2012 to 2016, so this is in real dollars, and Illinois went up by about 6% almost. And you look at some of the surrounding states, they're substantially less, or in some cases maybe even declining. So we've had an experience of significantly increasing operating costs in local governments. If you look at the effect of property taxes, and these comparisons will vary by what source you use, but usually Illinois is within the top 5 by whatever source you're using. We're looking now at effective property tax rates, which is property taxes as a percentage of house value. And so Illinois was at about 2.03 in 2017, and that would mean that over 10 years, we were paying about 20% of the house value in property taxes. So it's a significant bite. And if you're at a bordering county, if you look at Indiana, you're comparing 2.03% compared with 0.87% in Indiana. So you can see that if you could keep the same job and migrate for 10 miles or 20 miles, you could probably save substantially in your property taxes. So this is something I think that's been hitting the Quad Cities and Kankakee and these areas that are on and up Rockford maybe by Wisconsin. So you're seeing this kind of an effect happening. So what contributes to the relatively high effective property tax rates? Well, there's really, given our large number of overlapping governments, is probably the main reason. And Illinois, as you'll see in a later slide, has about 8,500 units of local government according to the comptroller. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Unfunded mandates certainly have increased costs. We had serious bond and debt limits. This caused pressure to create new units of government. Creating a new unit of government was relatively easy. Getting rid of one is relatively hard. And there's been overall a lower state support for local services and schools, particularly schools. And Illinois is coming near the bottom. So essentially that's throwing more burden on the property taxes. And this is really a factor that has to be considered. So if you look at the governments in Illinois, if you look at independent governments, those that can make independent decisions, we're looking at about almost 7,000 by the Census of Governments count. This was 2012. If you look at the Comptroller's Office, we're at about 8,516. Now, the Comptroller's Office governments, the ones that they're counting, basically are independent governments, but they're not necessarily, they sometimes report through another agency when you look at the Census of Governments. So essentially the difference between the two numbers is that the Census of Governments is really looking at the agency that they're reporting through. That's the smaller number. But the realistic number really in Illinois is about 8,500. So if you're looking at rising property taxes, and we, based on research that we've done, suggest that a larger number of governments does not necessarily mean higher expenditures. And the reason being that if you look at the aggregate county expenditures, you may create a new district that covers a relatively small area, and it may have a high tax rate, but basically it doesn't necessarily add a whole lot to the total expenditures in the county. So a better measure, we think, is looking at the number of governments in the county and looking at that as a per capita or per 10,000 basis. So essentially, if you look at the options that we really have, if you want to lower costs or reduce property taxes or streamline the government system. And then really two approaches. One is a relatively short term, and we see a number of those tried where you might identify in a county, let's say, 2 units of government, maybe a large one and a small one, and try to merge them. And at that point, there tends to be a lot of resistance by the people that are working in the governments, maybe by people who have vested interests. So essentially, it's kind of difficult to get it through, and in some cases, it's been very difficult and very acrimonious in the area. The other approach we think that's probably a better strategy is to take an intermediate level planning kind of strategy. Just say, okay, let's take a look at what are we going to have in 2025 or another year if you want. But basically, what kind of population are we going to have? What kind of services are we going to need? How basically are we going to finance them? And then, what can we do? And the approach that we're using with LEAP is basically to form a local efficiency planning team, then look at the population changes, the expenditures and the revenues, then look at the internal capacity of the current agencies to see whether they can find more efficiencies and maybe collaborate better, maybe merge some, whatever it needs to be, and then create an action plan that would streamline the local delivery arrangements. And this action plan then would be carried out over a couple of years. And so the LEAP program is kind of a little diagram here, but it's essentially the forecast the dynamics, look at the economics, check the service needs, and then try to figure out, can you do shared services, consolidated? Can you have efficiency measures? What sort of things can you do? And the ultimate, the outcome of this should be some sort of a new delivery system that presumably would be agreed upon by most of the people involved. Andy's going to talk a little bit about the assessment dashboard that we have. What we have at the present time is a guidebook, and the guidebook essentially walks you through the process. It's not a decision model. In other words, you can't drop in a bunch of numbers and out comes a solution for your county. The counties are so different, or the cities are so different, that there's no way to kind of routinize that. So essentially, we've provided a dashboard with a lot of different data from different sources, and we can try to you can use that as you try to make decisions locally. And the URL is up on the screen now, and so you can look at that if you want to. But essentially, the dashboard is there to assist you in making decisions, and hopefully there is a LEAP group here, a group of maybe 20 or 30 people in your county or your city or whatever, that basically is trying to work its way through this process. So we talked about this briefly earlier, and so it just gives you a little bit more information on what we're including in each one. The LEAP process, ultimately, when you get down to the 5 or 6 steps, the last step, though, is really kind of important. After you've designed a local strategy, there's been a lot of changes in the legislation in recent years. And what we've tried to do in the guidebook is provide the latest information and electronic references to those statutes. So you could do things now that you couldn't have done 5 years ago with respect to merging and consolidating or other kind of activities. And so it's important, really, as you're thinking about, are there other ways to provide the services, that you could check the most recent statutes, because there may be options that you didn't realize earlier. So Andy will take it over now and talk to you about the guidebook.
So as Norm mentioned briefly already, the LEAP process is intended to be bottom up. This program was designed so that practitioners such as yourselves would come together and discuss ways to improve service delivery at a local level through means such as sharing services or potentially consolidation. And the LEAP program has 2 components: a guidebook that walks you through the steps for those modernization discussions, and an electronic dashboard that provides information that would help inform those discussions. The guidebook discusses issues affecting Illinois and rural areas, efforts underway in other states to improve service delivery. There's a planning process, and there's also a review of statutes governing local structure for different government types, including special districts. And the LEAP dashboard can be used to examine population projections by county, compare revenue and spending levels for counties, municipalities, townships, special districts, and school districts, identify spending patterns countywide and by individual units of government, compare debt and pension levels, and identify funds that are nearing the property tax rate limits. I'm going to drop out of this PowerPoint now, and I'm going to give a demonstration of the LEAP dashboard. This is the main page for the Local Government Efficiency Assessment Dashboard. We have a link to it in the PowerPoints. Starts looking like this. Before anything else, it is important that you click this button in the lower right corner, which will make the data tool fit your full screen and make things a lot easier to read. At any point after this webinar, as you are using the dashboard, I recommend clicking this green button in the upper right corner, which is a user guide that will take you to a PDF that will answer some frequently asked questions regarding the database with things such as how to make selections, how to navigate, and things of that nature. So that's a resource that's available at any time, just clicking this button in the upper right corner. On the home page, you can see that these buttons lead to data by various subjects. We have it divided by county-wide summaries, which would be a total of all governments within a county. And on the other half, we have information on individual governments, such as county governments, townships, cities, special districts. We're going to start with population projections, because those are an important factor affecting future service needs. This is only available at a county level because the projections from the Illinois Department of Public Health are only for counties. By default, we have all the group averages by county size types selected, but you can view this for any county you wish. Type in the search bar, you will be able to find a county that way. It can be in all caps or all lowercase, and it recognizes parts of names. So if I just type in Calb, and you can find DeKalb County that way. Page. Just pull out a few more. Example. There's no limit to the number of counties you can view data for at any given time, but for clarity and readability, I would recommend selecting up to 5. It can be done for things as simple as selecting a county and its neighbors. For a lot of these data tools, there are a lot of subjects that, a lot of local governments that you could get data for. We recommend using the search bar to find the names of them because it can be easier than scrolling through the list. The top graph shows projected population changes, and the black bar is the total, and the other two bars show changes in the dependency ratio, which is the number of residents under age 20 or over age 65 compared to the total working age population. In most counties, there is projected to be an increase in the dependent population with fewer workers covering them. And for any of these graphics, if a label is not appearing, if you mouse over it, it will show what the percentage is. And for any graphic in this tool, if you click in the upper right corner, it'll give you a full screen view that will make things easier to read. If you want to go back to the main page, you just click on Back to Report in the upper left corner. Start the bar graph showing these population trends. We also have a more detailed table that will let you view population counts in 2025 for each category. In this one, we can view the full table. You select as many counties as you want, and they would all appear in this. This just gives a sense of what service needs might look like in the year 2020-25 based on projections from the Illinois Department of Public Health. Related to population projections are revenue and expenditure forecasts. We have these available by countywide and for individual units of government. For this demonstration, we will be using individual governments. By default, we have selected the typical municipality with a population size of 1,000 to 999. Information is also available for individual cities, such as, let's go to DeKalb again. DeKalb City. The unit of government names have the counties in parentheses afterwards because in some cases there's the same name for multiple counties. For example, there's a Schaumburg Township in Cook County and I believe one in Joe Davis County. So to avoid confusion, we have the counties indicated as well. Using these slider bars along the left side of the data tool, you can change the projected revenues and expenditures. This can go up to plus 25% or minus 25%. It's an annual percentage change, so it would be 3% each year, 4% each year, and so on. As I slide this blue bar, the values in the blue box will increase. If I slide these ones in the green box, values in the green box will change. You can either use the slider or you can type your percentage into the boxes here. And if the slider is being finicky, you can zoom in and that will make it easier to select the exact number you want. For now, we will just set it at 3%. That's a conservative estimate for how much we would expect costs to increase each year based on our research from the Municipal Price Index. It'll be 3% as well, 3.3%. So what this blue box is saying is that in the city of DeKalb, which is just our sample for demonstration purposes, in 2016, the city of DeKalb spent about $1,200 per resident. And if those costs increase 3.3% each year, then in 2025, the city of DeKalb would have to spend $1,600 per resident to continue providing services at the current level. And if property taxes increase 3% each year, then property taxes in the city of DeKalb would increase from $320 per resident to almost $420 per resident. For context, we also include a composition of spending by function. You can see that in the city of DeKalb, the largest share of spending is on public safety, which is a trend consistent across most municipalities. For example, we will bring up group averages. In this case, average municipality with a population of 50,000 to 100,000, they typically levy about $500 per resident, and if that increased 3.3%, it would increase to $630. And the typical mid-sized city of 50,000 to 100,000 spends the most on public safety. Second largest share after that appears to be utilities and sanitation at about 11% of total expenditures. Related to revenue and expenditure projections is the revenue structure within a local government. We also have information on that. It's available for cities, county governments, townships, and special districts. In the current slide, we just have a few cities selected as an example. In Abingdon City, the largest source of revenue appears to be charges for services. As a trend consistent across a lot of other cities, we can see in Addison, they get about a little more than a third of their revenue from charges for services. In Adeline Village, most of the revenue appears to be coming from miscellaneous sources in 2016. Miscellaneous sources are things such as earned interest, property sales, things of that nature. For demonstration purposes, we can also bring up a fire district. Bring up a fire district, see what that looks like. It appears that in the Albion Fire District, nearly all the revenue appears to be from believe that one is local sales tax. It's difficult to tell because I have so many items selected, but that's from property tax. In case information on the revenue structure for each unit of government is available for those interested. This information is what was reported to the Illinois Office of the Comptroller in 2016. So anything that reported to the Comptroller in 2016 will be in this database. Information from the Comptroller is updated annually. So as we receive updated data from the Comptroller, it will be updated on this data tool as well. An advantage to the local efficiency assessment dashboard over the Comptroller's warehouse database is that it is more useful for making comparisons. Information from the warehouse is great if you're trying to get information for one unit of government. It is a bit more difficult to make comparisons with that. So that is something we try to do by adding value with this database. Besides revenue structure, another piece of information that might be helpful is property tax status. This is information on how much property tax levied in a community is from funds that are nearing the maximum rate allowed in statutes. We just have a few example municipalities selected here. In Addison Village, all of the property taxes levied are from funds that have no limit assigned. In Addyville Village, when we have selected just an example, the majority of the funds are in property tax funds that are not approaching the property tax limit. There is still some leeway there. Information is also available by school districts. In the school district we selected, which is number 122 in LaSalle County, most of the property tax funds are from, property taxes levied are from funds that are nearing their limit. So in this particular school district, there are not a lot of options for funding through property tax. They would have to possibly consider other means, other sources of revenue. Another subject besides property tax limits is property tax rates. Earlier in the presentation, we discussed statewide effective property tax rates. This information is also available at a local level. We have a few municipalities selected, but we can also do, did I hear a question? For an example, I'm going to select the city of DeKalb and some neighboring cities. One application of this tool is you can see how tax rates in your municipality or your township compare to neighboring townships or townships of similar size. So I'm going to select the city of DeKalb. Let me select Sycamore. Let's also take Aurora. And just take one more. We'll also take Rochelle. In this case, the saying is that the city of DeKalb has an effective property tax rate of 3.2%. So the average resident in the city of DeKalb pays property taxes equal to about 3% of the value of their home, which is a bit higher than in the neighboring cities. For reference, we can also compare that with the average city of that size. DeKalb has a population of about 40,000. And the average mid-size or larger city, the effective property tax rate is about 2.5%. So in this particular case, the city of DeKalb has a higher property tax rate than other cities of its size and cities of its neighbor. This comparison could be done for cities in your community as well. It has every city and every township available in it, but we were just using the city of DeKalb as an example. Another related indicator is spending per pupil. This is strictly from school districts, the measure of how cost-effective schools are in an area. By default, we have all the counties grouped, all the school districts grouped by enrollment size. And we see that as school districts get larger, operating expenditures per pupil also increase. Every school district is available in here. It might be difficult to find them based on size. So if you have a particular district, we would advise using the search bar. And as you are searching for governments, if it does not appear, if you click this triangle, that will expand the category, and then you will be able to find it. If you're not sure what the school district is called, if you type in the name of the city it is located in, then chances are you'll be able to find it that way. Again, the search bar is important for this data tool because there are simply so many school districts in here and it can be difficult to navigate it without that. Besides property tax status and revenue structure, we also have information on police and fire pensions. This information comes from the Illinois Department of Insurance from 2017. We have information for every downstate and suburban police and fire pension fund that reported to the Department of Insurance in 2017. By default, we have the pension funds grouped by size of participants or employees currently paying into the system. And the first graph shows trends in the number of pensioners and participants in police pension funds. And regardless of pension size, there has been an increase in the number of pensioners, which is this darker green bar. And the average pension benefit has also increased between 2012 and 2016. So pensions are becoming more expensive in Illinois pension funds, regardless of size. This information is available for individual pension funds as well, for those that are interested in making those comparisons. Same information is also available for fire pension funds. If you're unsure which size category your pension fund falls into, we recommend using the search bar to find it. In case the City of DeKalb's pension fund has 50 participants, so we can bring that in there. There was a decrease in the average pension benefit compared to other pension funds. Besides pension funding, we also have information on spending by purpose for individual governments. We just have a few municipalities selected, but we can also add some townships. Information for spending is divided by capital in several operational categories such as parks and recreation, health care, public safety, transportation. This information is available for those interested, so you can see exactly what governments in your area are spending on in terms of services provided. One more subject of interest I'll mention before opening it up to questions is information on school district personnel within your community. Again, we have these sorted by size categories by default, but every school district is available in this for comparison. Just bring up a few smaller ones. We have information on employees per 10 pupils, just as a measure of relative size for how many employees cover each student. We have information on the average retirement benefit paid by school district because school pensions are sometimes the subject of discussion. And finally, we have average salaries by school districts by employment type for administrative personnel, for classroom personnel, and for support employees such as janitors. I'd like to reiterate that this dashboard is under continuous improvement. We are always happy to continue adding and clarifying information to make it more useful to practitioners. And as new information comes out, we are going to keep updating it as that information becomes available. With that, I am open for questions.
Andy and Norm, thanks. Andy, can you see the questions on the chat box?
Oh, I see them now. I wasn't able to see the chat and the demo at the same time, so I can go through
Yeah,
some
there's
of those
a couple about how to get access to your to dashboard, and I think that's been cleared up. But then there are a couple questions related to the data, including are the data time series and what year period is available. And I think you briefly mentioned that, but maybe for clarification, you could talk about that again.
The information available is currently only for 2016. Our aim at this point was to provide a snapshot for the situation from the current period. Doing time series is rather difficult with the comptroller data set because there aren't the same number of governments that report from year to year. So for now, we only have 2016. In the future, we will try to work on comparisons to 2012 from the census of governments where every unit was included. Also of note is that toward the end of this year, the Census Bureau will be releasing its 2017 census of governments. That will not be available for a continuous time series, but we will at least be able to do some comparisons with 2012 so we can see how different communities fared before and after the recession, and we can get a better sense of some county-wide information over the past 5 years.
Then there was another question about whether the graphs that you showed would be convertible to PDFs.
There is not a direct option for converting it to PDF. There are a few options for that. So far, I've been telling people that if they require custom tabulations or anything of that sort, I'm happy to prepare those and I can usually turn that around in the same day. Otherwise, a quick workaround for now is to take a screenshot of the graphic you are looking at and then paste that into the document you are trying to work with. An unfortunate limitation of the platform we publish this database on is that it does not allow for exporting to a clipboard or a PDF or anything of that sort.
Can you talk a little bit about how the health departments did their population projections?
Right. In 2015, the Illinois Department of Public Health ran some population projections for each county in the state, and they have that by total population and by 3 population age groups: under 20, ages 20 to 64, and over age 65. And then basically they publish that and we compile it all here to make it easier to view. Yes. And the population projections that the Department of Public Health uses is a cohort survival method, which means that the projections are based on people that are already alive and well in those counties, and it's also based on life expectancy. So it's based on who is alive in that county today and who's being born, how long people are expected to live, what would we expect the population to look like 5 or 10 years from now. So these projections from the Illinois Department of Public Health are about as reliable as we can get for the state of Illinois. There are proprietary sources that give you more local projections, but the Department of Public Health is a really safe bet for projecting out populations at a county level. Chat box, see if there's anything else that came up. Out-migration trends. That information is unfortunately not available in the Department of Public Health data. There is information from the U.S. Census Bureau on that we will work to include in this database as well, because that's an issue that affects a lot of local governments as well. I actually looked at the out-migration data the other day, and it looks like in about 3/4 of the counties in Illinois, there was a net out-migration between 2010 and 2017. So that information will certainly be added to this data tool in the future. And I also see a question asking if this presentation will be made available after the meeting. Yes, it will, and we will also include a recording of it for future reference. We also received a question about the property tax percentages. These are Fortunately, these property tax projections do not account for the impact of inflation. The projections are user defined, so you can enter whatever percentage you think is most reasonable. When using this LEAP data tool, we encourage being in touch with local practitioners that might have a sense of where they would expect property taxes to be headed. We don't have a definitive projection for each community because conditions vary so much and service environments are so uncertain. Again, the projections do not include anticipated inflation. It's strictly you are able to make a projection within a range and adjust that based on what you think is most reasonable within your community. Total tax. The percentage increase for that projection is based on, it's just an annual percentage increase based on the total amount that was levied in the base year. So it'd be increased by 3% from 2016 to 2017, and then a 3% increase on what was levied in 2017. So it's based on the total tax, not based on the tax rate. So it's we also had a question about the projection methodology. Is this for this question about the projections for the property tax and expenditures or for the projections? So there is not an exact methodology for the projections. It's all hypothetical based on user specifications. So it's a hypothetical way of saying what would happen if expenditures increased 3% each year, or what would happen if they increased 4% each year, or what would happen if they decreased 5% each year. We didn't want to go forth and publish one set of expenditure and revenue projections for each unit of government because that is so uncertain. We simply provide the tools to see what revenues and expenditures would look like under different compositions. Another factor to consider that makes these projections difficult and why we don't have a preset parameter is that the composition of spending might change in 10 years. We wouldn't know how to adjust that. The projections provided on the data tool, there's not a preset, it's not based on an expert opinion, it's based on what the user would like to see explored. It's all theoretical based on what the user enters. We do not have a model that would definitively project what expenditures will look like based on what we think. We set 3% as the default projection rate because that's just a conservative estimate. We had another excellent question about what are some useful bases of comparison to make when using this data tool. A common option is to just take a community and its neighbors. If you want to go more in depth, a good option is to compare communities of similar size, and the data tool currently allows that. We have each unit of government sorted by government type and by size in terms of residents or population served. We think that might provide a better basis for comparison than simply comparing against your neighbors. But sometimes that's important to know as well. Unfortunately, this data tool does not include information on other states. The main data source underlying this database is the Illinois Office of the Comptroller, so we do not have information on local governments in other states. For some of the data tabs on this, we can include information on other states. For example, the property tax rates. That's from the Census Bureau, so we could have some sample indicators from other states on that one. The data tool does not currently include other states, but we'll work on including some measures of that for reference going forward where it is possible. Yes, the data is mainly from 2016 at this time because that is the most recent available from the Illinois Office of the Comptroller. The Census of Governments has information for 2017, but that will not be published until much later this year. At this point, the 2016 data from the Comptroller is the most recent snapshot we can get. Still have some time. Is there any other questions?
There might be, Andy, there might be questions coming in, but while we're thinking about that, Nancy's going to put up a poll. We usually use these polls just to get a quick measure of whether people learned anything new and whether the information was useful. So if people want to watch the screen, and I think that we should go back to your PowerPoint to do that, Andy, if you can, because I think right now you're on your demonstration of the tool.
This last question, what solutions are we recommending or whatever? The idea of the LEAP guidebook and the database essentially was to provide assistance to local groups that wanted to make decisions. In other words, there's nothing here that's coming down from the top or from the state or us or anybody else. It basically is, if in fact you look at your projections, if it looks like you need to make some changes, if you decide to form a group and try to take some action, then basically here's a tool that you can use to quickly do the comparisons and so forth. But underlying this whole idea is that when you form your LEAP team, if that's the way you go, then you would basically try to get your local data. So you would call in the police chief or the fire chief or the sheriff or whoever, and basically obtain the information locally as well. What the LEAP database is it's based on audited data sent to the comptroller's office as part of the annual reports. So it's probably as good a data collectively as there is in the state. But the whole motivation here is really that as you look ahead, you say things are going to change substantially, but we really need to start taking some action rather than waiting until 2025 and if we have a budget shortfall or something like that. So it's meant to be a reasoned, thought through, planned out process. And by looking ahead, if you were to dissolve a government or consolidate or something like that, and if the officials have a 4-year term, something like that, then it may take 2 or 3 years to be able to kind of realign the services and reshape the programs. So it's meant to be totally permissive or enabling, and it's meant to simply provide a tool for local officials who want to do it. Having said that, you may also find in some cases, and some of the questions kind of indicated this, there are a lot of groups, Forecast 5 Analytics, for example, will for contract go in and work with communities, and some of you may already do that, and they can do a far more in-depth type of tailored analysis than we can do on the guidebook. But the guidebook was meant to be basically an easily accessible, fairly easy to use. It doesn't cost anything to use. Nobody's prevented from using the information. We did put a copyright on it simply to make sure that nobody or someone in the private sector, for example, could copyright it somehow and then charge people to use it. There's no charge to using this system. It doesn't have to be done by Northern Illinois University or us. It can be done by extension. I mean, you can have it facilitated by extension or the Institute for Rural Affairs or somebody else if you want a neutral party to come in and walk the people through the process. But it's really a process, and the ultimate aim is to decide whether or not, given what's likely to happen over the 5, 6, 7 years, what's likely to happen, do you need to make some changes in local structure? So that's really the sole purpose of it. And hopefully we'll end up with some redesigned service delivery systems that are better suited for, let's say, 2025. And if you take a look at it and decide there are no changes to be made, then that's fine too. But that's pretty much where we are.
Norm, it might be really interesting to see over time if people in decision-making roles are able to take this information and look at some creative ways to consolidate or collaborate with neighbors or what have you, and provide the same level and quality of service, but over a larger population, so they don't get those increases per capita. And it'd be interesting to see how that works out and see some examples of how people are making that work. That would be very creative responses, but I think that if you look at this kind of data, you really would have more confidence in making some of those larger decisions.
Right, and that was one of the big aims in developing this data tools. We were trying to just overcome the knowledge gap and trying to go forth those efforts. We kind of think you have to understand the problem before you can think about solutions, and the data tool is a way of showing where your community stands compared to others.
There is a source too, and I'm not sure if it's still up on the Lieutenant Governor's page or not, but in the previous administration, the Lieutenant Governor had sent out a survey every year on collaboration, and she had the responses she would receive from the survey, she basically would post on her website. But there were examples of places that were doing a lot of fairly creative things in terms of not so much consolidation as much as sharing resources, sharing expertise, maybe sharing equipment. And there were St. Charles and Batavia and some others had put together an interesting way of sharing fire protection equipment and services and things. There were some other educational groups, educational districts that had basically done some things. Again, I don't know whether that will continue or not. It may be that we end up doing it here just to kind of supplement this service, and then basically just send out a questionnaire every year asking what have you done and how did it work. And it wasn't a difficult questionnaire, but we helped design it. So we'll see how that comes out. But I think that's an excellent thing to follow up on. We're going to try to the extent possible. We're going to try to keep this updated and going, and it's going to cost a little bit of money to keep it updated, but we're not talking, serious money. So hopefully we can kind of keep it, assuming that it turns out to be useful. We'll try to keep it going.
If you haven't had a chance to log in your level of learning on the poll on the screen, take a minute and do that for us. Norm, do you think that is there any kind of a clearinghouse for units of government that want to explore those ways of sharing or collaborating with neighbors? Sometimes it's a neighbor and sometimes it's a little farther afield. Is there any way for units of government to explore that?
Well, there was, again, on the Lieutenant Governor's page, there was
a journal of, a best practices journal of shared services, and that was pretty extensive when it was still being published. I am not sure if that is still available with the new administration, but when that was around, it had a lot of detailed examples by service area, and it documented exactly which communities were involved in it if you wanted to contact them and see how they did it.
I'm not too sure what we can do with, as Andy indicated earlier, the revenue structure is different in each state. And so it would be kind of difficult to figure out how to make some of these comparisons. Now, it may be that Indiana has an office of the comptroller that does some things. We can certainly do some of this with the Census of Governments in 2017, but I'm not sure in the non-census years, non-government census years, whether we'd be able to actually have, much detailed information. We're very much interested as people start using this. As we said, as we opened, if there are things that can be changed on here to make it easier to use, let Andy know. His information is on the screen, and we'll try to keep modifying it and tweaking it, trying to make it so that it's a useful tool. Or if there's additional things that should be put on there that we haven't put on, the stuff that we've tried to do is we didn't want to make it so complex that people couldn't manage it, but there may be some other things that that we would have information on somewhere for all the units of government that we could put in, but it's not clear what that would be right now.
Well, we're winding down and coming up to the end of the hour, so I wanted to thank both Andy and Norm for sharing the tool and for introducing this topic. I think it's an important one. It's important to know what resources are available as people contemplate these decisions. The PowerPoint and the recording will be available later if you want to listen again or if you want to share it with others. There's no cost and nothing to preclude you from logging in and listening in whenever it's convenient. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks again, Norm and Andy. We appreciate all the work you've done and all the work that you promised to do. We'll make good use of these materials. So thanks everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.